Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Very Best Podcast, an interview show focused on our personal connections to the Pokemon franchise and what it means to us. With me today is character artist, illustrator, designer, and one of my personal favorite artists on the internet, Boston Celtics hooper, Teeg, aka Teeketch. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Also, thank you for the Celtic shout out. Very appreciated. It's a big part of me.
Yes, if anybody follows you on social media, they know that that's, you're obviously you're much more than these things, but to me, oftentimes it's like you're dope art and then just going on about the Celtics. Those are like the two things I get from you constantly. I don't know if that's the brand you want, but that's the brand you have.
Listen, it has unrelated to Pokemon real quick, but it has become my singular mission these last few years to be like, hey, I have a lot of nerd friends and art pals who don't like sports, and I'm trying to be like, hey, it's pretty cool, man. You should probably try to get into basketball, preferably the Celtics. But hey, I won't be mad at you if you pick a different team. Unless it's the Lakers, then we probably can't be friends anymore.
Yeah, that's a tough thing is because oftentimes those two worlds don't coincide with one another. Like being, a big into video games or like we're talking about today, Pokemon. But then for me, I'm a big like NFL guy, and it's hard finding the cross there of friends who are into both. Usually, you have friend groups in one and then friend groups in the other. So yeah, I appreciate the work you're doing to try to merge those two intersecting things in some capacity.
Oh yeah, it's a noble cause, I think.
Very noble. So, not to catch you too off guard, but we're starting off with the Fast Five, which is my segment that's a set of 5 secret icebreaker questions designed to help us get into the groove of talking about Pokemon. You don't know what these are. Everything else going on in the show you were privy to before recording, but these are a little bit of a mystery to you. Like I talked about before the show, it's not necessarily about getting things right. It's just about top of mind answering the question, so don't feel too bad. Tej, are you ready for the Fast Five?
Absolutely.
Okay, question 1. What Pokemon is Bill transformed into when you help him turn back into his human form north of Cerulean City in the Gen 1 games?
That's you know what? Excellent question. Let's just take a second to appreciate that question. Um, you know what? I'll be honest with you. I don't think I know this, but I feel like if I was gonna put a guess out, I have two guesses, but one of them I don't think was in Gen 1, if memory serves. So I don't think that could be it, but I think it would have been cool if it was it. Uh which would have been the what is it? The Rotom? Is that what it is? The one that's like a phone or a
Rotom.
computer or
Yeah.
whatever. Like I think it would have been cool, like narratively. It's like, hey, this guy who made this computer, but I don't think that's it because I don't think he was a Gen 1 Pokemon or it was a Gen
No,
1
Rotom was
Pokemon.
much later.
So then my thought goes, okay, well, what's kind of another weird little freakazoid like that? And some of that brain then goes to Porygon, which I also don't think is correct, but I feel like in my heart I want that to be right.
So I'll give you the right answer, but just to let you know, when I was doing finding the answer to this question, I for some reason thought it was Eevee, and I misremembered. It's actually Clefairy, which I would have never guessed, which was quite a surprise to me. Yeah, because I don't think he tells you what he is. He just has the art, right? The pixel art of the Pokemon. But back in Gen 1, I don't know if you remember, a lot of the Pokemon shared the same pixel art when they were on your team. Like they would all have just like a generic form, and then you click on it and then you know what Pokemon it was. So yeah, it was actually a Clefairy, which is pretty surprising.
Well, it's
Question
funny
number 2.
too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's funny too because like while I obviously most of my Pokemon memories are from Gen 1, there's also a lot about that game that I don't remember. And so
Yeah, a
it's
lot
like
of
a
weird
lot of the
stuff.
sort of like the little kind of side narrative stuff or these little I'm like I played that when I was 12.
Exactly, yeah. You're not dosing into the nostalgia over and
No,
over as like a lot of
no.
people do. Yeah. Question number 2. How can you tell the difference between a Pokemon and a Ditto pretending to be that Pokemon?
Okay. So now I know how I personally tell the difference, but I don't know if this is like a canonical thing because I don't know how the people in the actual game perceive the world around them versus how we as people playing the game see the world that's presented to us. But to me, it's because it can change its whole body to look like the other Pokemon, except for its face. It still has that awesome dumb Ditto face.
I specifically, but yes. And it is canonical. In the anime, they show it numerous times. It's weird. So, real quick diatribe. I have a personal project that I'm doing where I'm watching, and this started a couple years ago, through the entire Pokemon anime chronologically, just because I was so curious. Because as a kid, I only watched like a couple of episodes here and there, and obviously a lot of it is like made for kids and it's filler and it's whatever, whatever. But there is some cool storytelling along the way. Anyways, early in the show, they make a point to say that like good Ditto can transform perfectly, but there's like some Ditto who aren't as good at it that the eye thing happens. But then later in the show, they're just like, no, all Ditto have the issue of. So I don't know. It's just like a weird retcon there. But yes, you got the question right. Question number 3. How do you evolve Galarian Farfetch'd into Sirfetch'd?
Okay, so this is a great question because I feel like I remember how. I just don't remember exactly like the specific step by step. But if memory serves, you have to get is it called like a big leak, or you have to get an item, and because they can hold items, and then you have to, with the item equipped, I think you have to either, it's like win 3 battles, or you have to use a certain attack so many times, or hit with a certain attack so many times while the leak is equipped.
Okay, you're so close. So the leak technically isn't a part of the evolution, except for the fact that a Farfetch'd holding a leak ups its chances of getting critical hits. And the way you evolve a Galarian Farfetch into Sirfetch is to get 3 critical hits in a single battle. So you were very close. You remembered the 3 part of it. The leak isn't necessarily required, but like if you're gonna get it, it's kind of required because getting a critical hit in a battle is hard, let alone 3 in the same battle. So I'll give you partial credit on that one. Question number 4. Name 2 Pokemon Team Rocket uses in the games.
In the games, okay. Well, actually, I feel like so I know. Oh, so this is where you're gonna get me on Pokemon names. Is it Ekans, right? That's the snake one? I think they got that. Yep. And then I know they have the poison. It's a coughing or a wheezing? I don't remember which. I know one turns into the other one, but I don't remember which one they have in there.
All 3 of those are right. So the correct answers, and there's other answers too, but these are the ones top of mind. Rattata, Eradicate, Zubat, Golbat, Coughing, Wheezing, Grimer, Muck, Ekans, Arbok. A fun fact about Coughing and Wheezing is that they were originally going to be named NY and LA for New York and Los Angeles because of the smog, but they ended up changing their names to Coughing and Wheezing, which I like a lot more than Nye and
I think
Law.
Like, I kind of get it, but yeah, there's definitely Coughing, Wheezing, definitely way better names.
For sure. Question number 5. What's the easiest way to tell a Kanto and a Galarian Farfetch'd apart?
I mean, I know from the art side of it, the leak is different. Like the Galarian Farfetch, usually it's like a bigger leak, and they kind of carry it like they have to like drag it on the ground almost, versus a classic Farfetch was just like a little stick almost. Because I remember us way back in the day playing on the Game Boy. I for a long time I just thought it was a stick.
Yeah, I did too. And then they're like, a leak. And I was like, what's a leak? And then
me as a little kid, I was like, what is that?
Yeah. So that was one of 2 correct answers. The other one, which is also part of the art side of it, is Kanto Farfetch'd is like a light brown tannish color, its feathers, whereas the Galarian one is like a darker brown, like a chocolate brown. But the leak too is another big identifier. The Kanto leak is much smaller. You use it much more like a pointer stick, whereas like you said with the Galarian one, it's much more of like a hefty piece of vegetable. That was a fast 5. I think you did a pretty good job. I think for the most part, I caught you off guard with a couple of questions, but I think you did overall. I think you got 1, 2, 3, 3.5 out of 5 right.
I'll take it.
The one that tripped you up was the Clefairy one, but like I said, being honest, I didn't even have the right answer, and I was the one looking up the information for it, so don't feel too bad about that one.
No, that's a
Let's shift over.
Question.
Let's shift over to your first steps. Everyone remembers their first time with Pokemon, so I want to know from you, You mentioned having siblings. How did you first learn about Pokemon? Was it from them or was it on your own?
No, so I thought about this when I was going looking over the questions, and this is an interesting one. So I came to Pokemon when it first started because I didn't Gen 1 was my first game, and I was going back and I'm like trying to think, how did I learn about this? Because I never watched the anime either. So it wasn't the anime that was like, oh, here's this thing.
Oh,
Oh wait,
interesting.
it's a game, cool. So I was going back and it literally must have been, so I was trying to look up like, oh, when did the game come out? You know what I mean? And it was like, I think it was like June or something. And so literally must have been some kids at school got the game and we're just, talking about video games because we all played games. And they were talking about this Pokemon thing and it was the coolest thing ever, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right. I was like, sounds wicked. I was like, I've got to try to get into that. So I literally just must have heard about it on the playground and then eventually got the game, as we'll learn in a question coming up here. But yeah, I had no, because I didn't had no context of the anime at all for like a while.
That's so interesting. Or the trading cards?
No, well, the cards are an interesting one too because I even the cards themselves, like I remember kids would come to school, like after this was after I think I played the games a bit, but kids would come to school with like the with a couple of the cards, and then every now and again a kid would be like, oh, I have these Japanese cards, like they're not translated. And like again, this was very early internet days or even some pre-internet depending on what time I'm thinking of. So we didn't know what the heck was going on. So if this kid came, he's like, "Oh, these are Japanese cards, right? They're like it's more rare." And so you just playground nonsense that you're throwing around. But
Yeah.
like this, so my sort of beginning days of knowing about Pokemon and what it was were so almost fragmented. Like I didn't know how these things were connected, or like I didn't know this was all the same thing. It was weird times back then.
So interesting. Yeah, just kind of figure out through the grapevine about stuff. We didn't have the internet. We could just go search right away and figure everything out we needed to figure out. So your first game, was it red, blue, yellow? You said you started with
My
Gen 1, but which one?
So my very first Pokemon game was Pokemon Blue. And I also and my brother had Red, so I kind of had both of those experiences.
So did you choose blue, or was it like we're getting one for you, one for your brother, and it just ended up that you got blue?
Yeah, so this will kind of jump ahead a little bit into a question coming up here. But so like I said, Pokemon was kind of I've learned about on the schoolyard, and I remember we just essentially like asked for the game for Christmas, and it became a thing of like I got a Game Boy with Pokemon Blue, and he got a Game Boy with Pokemon Red, and that was how I got into it.
That's so cool. I'm assuming you picked Squirtle as your starter, the cover
Absolutely not.
athlete, as you would call it. No.
Absolutely not. So and again, this is how weird it was, right? Because there was no, and it's a weird thing to talk about. This goes into a little bit of the nostalgia question coming up, but like back then, because there was nothing before it, right? So going into the game, I had no every single thing was new to me. So when I open the game and you go through the whole bit and he's like, "Oh, pick your starter," and I remember immediately looking at Charmander and being like, "No, this guy sucks." I was like, "Absolutely not happening." And then I look at Squirtle and I was like, "Okay, well this is just like a non-fire version of the other guy that I think sucks." You know what I mean? Like they're
Yeah,
basically the same guy. And then I saw Bulbasaur and I said, "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life."
man after
So
my own heart.
I have been a Bulbasaur truther for as long as I've been a Pokemon fan.
Yeah, I'm with you there. He's also the only one that was on all fours, which is way more, yeah, obviously animalistic than the other two. And everyone was obsessed with Charmander and Charizard. It like but when I'm kind of like you, is like, well, Squirtle isn't too much different from Charmander in terms of design, and Bulbasaur was so unique. Uh, and I just loved how adorable it was. And I think honestly, I saw the anime before I played the game, so I remember like one of the popular episodes of Ash finding a Bulbasaur and me seeing what it turned into, and I was so stoked about it. So I'm glad to hear that I have a fellow Bulbasaur lover in my company. So outside of Bulbasaur, you start the game, you're going through, you're traversing the world, you're catching Pokemon. Who's the first non-starter who you're like, that's my guy? Was it because you're eventually, we'll talk about this later, your favorite Pokemon Sirfetch'd, was it Farfetch'd or was it somebody else?
No, so because Farfetch'd, I mean, again, I'd have to really go back. If memory serves, I feel like Farfetch'd isn't really around in those kind of early areas.
Oh no, I think you have to get to uh one of the middle cities and you have to trade for them.
Yeah, so like that was, I think once I kind of got into it and really was having all that stuff happen, I was like, oh man, I love this thing. Because as we'll learn later, talking about the way I view Pokemon and design and stuff, I love things that are dumb in a good way. And Farfetch was 100 because I was like, you got all these creatures that can do spit fire and I was like, and here comes a duck with a stick. You know what I mean? I was like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
But no, so I was going back and thinking of it, and as I talked about, like with being right there for Gen 1, not really knowing the anime, because I don't even remember if the anime was going when the games came out or if that came a little bit later. Because that's how removed I was from these things. Like, so even when you mentioned, like, oh, I assumed you had blue, so you picked Squirtle. No, because to me, the cover was Blastoise. I had no idea that that was even related to the Squirtle that this
Oh,
guy was
interesting.
asking me to
Okay.
pick. Just like people that picked red. Like, I mean, you might have been able to make some sort of, logistical deductions there, but like no, I had no idea. So it wasn't until I'm playing the game I'm like,
Fascinating.
oh, that's what that thing is. All right. So I was going through and looking up, and I was like, the sort of half answer is every Pokemon I ran into was my favorite because they were all new. But
Yeah.
realistically, going back, like I think like a Mankey was probably like my first sort of favorite outside of Bulbasaur because I got like a Pidgey and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is everything is so cool. And then I just remember being like, again, similar to my Farfetch thing, I was like, this is just a monkey who fights. I was like, this rules.
Did
So yeah,
you
probably Mankey for me.
were you stoked when it eventually evolved into Primate? Did you like Primate more, or was Mankey the default
Um,
monkey cooler to you?
I think well, I mean, I'd have to look it up for sure, but if memory serves, I feel like the visually not that different. Like, obviously, it is different because it's an evolution, but it's not like when you're tracing a line of a certain Pokemon, right? And you're like, oh, how did we get here from
Dragonair to Dragonite,
this?
yeah. It's like what
Yeah.
happened here?
So whereas like Mankey evolution, and you're like, oh, you're just kind of like a bigger you're like a bigger one of this. I was like, that's all right. But there are certain times where like a thing would evolve and I was like, oh man, this sucked. Like I wish I kind of kept the other one.
Yeah. So I don't know if it ties necessarily to you and your brother getting those Game Boys and the games for Christmas. Maybe it's a different memory, but I wanted to move over to our next segment, which is the core memory. I just share with me a favorite Pokemon memory of yours. Could be one, could be a couple of them. You have free reign. Share with the people.
So I have two for you. The one is with the Game Boys at Christmas because I remember it so vividly. And I actually was like, I was texting my brother the other day, and I'm like, hey, do you remember what the Game Boys were? Blah, blah, blah. Because I'm like, look, because in my brain, right? So basically the story is we we grew up super poor, right? So like gifts and Christmas were always weird because we would always make a list. My mother was always like, "Oh, make a list for Santa or whatever," and he'll try to do his best. And I was like, "All right, cool, man." So we would make a list of all this stuff, and my mom was always so good at like taking the list and kind of sifting through it and being like, "Okay, I think this is the one thing that is like the thing."
Yeah.
So so then when you didn't get all the stuff on the list, you didn't even really care because you got the one thing that she deduced was like the actual important one. So I remember waking up on Christmas, going out there and opening these Game Boys, and again, it was a Game Boy with Pokemon. Like I said, I got a blue Game Boy, which I looked up because in my brain, for whatever reason, because I think I might have just owned this later in life, and that I just kind of associated those memories. In my brain, it was the clamshell Game Boy Advance SPs that we got. But then I was looking it up. When did those come out? And I was like, no, like math and time wise, that doesn't work out. So I texted
Much
my brother. I was
later,
like,
yeah.
yeah, I texted my brother and I was like, what Game Boys did we get? And he was like, oh, they were just the regular Game Boys, but they put out like different color shell versions for like around that time. So I like looked into it more. So I guess, and it was like Play It Loud, I think is what the campaign was called, at least according to Wikipedia. And they had put out like, I think it was like 5 or 6 different colorways. It was like red, blue, green, yellow, purple, whatever. So that's what we got. We got, it was just a normal Game Boy, but they were just a different color instead of like the classic gray Game Boy. And so I just remember getting those, plopping the batteries in, and it was like an all day thing. It was just like we're playing Pokemon, and I'm like, oh, what's this thing? What's it? Because this was obviously like, different versions had different Pokemon in there and like different things. Everything, everything was so intense and so mysterious because there is no prior context to anything. It's not like now where if you were to pick up like a Gen 6 or something, like there were no gens. I didn't know, we didn't know what any of this stuff was. Um so that will always sort of be my go-to Pokemon memory. And then another one which is I guess kind of funny, kind of messed up, but like we're good friends, so it's whatever. But my buddy, he we used to be way more into the Pokemon cards when we were younger. This was maybe a few years after like we got into the games. And I was never into cards. I'm still not really a card game person. But I was again, as a poor kid, you always kind of on the playground, you're trying to find ways that you can scheme or whatever and make a buck. And I had like some pretty hand me down Pokemon cards, whatever, and I kind of finessed my way into trading some of these lowly crap cards for some decent ones. And I was just trading these up. And eventually I finessed some people out of some holographic ones, maybe a Charizard or something. And I remember, flipping those on the playground for a couple of bucks. And it's one of those things now where, we joke about it still to this day. Cause I remember we had gone to, this was probably like, excuse me, this was probably like 8 or 10 years ago now. We had gone to PAX East, and they had like they had like vendors there and stuff, and the guys like, oh, bring in your Pokemon card binders or whatever, right? And like we'll buy them off your trade or whatever. And I was joking, I was like, hey man, do you still have like your cards? And he was like, yeah, I do. And he was like, I was like, bring your binder tomorrow or whatever when we come back. I was like, you never know. And he's like, all right. And we go over there, and the guy's like, oh, and so my buddy had almost a complete set of like the OG,
Oh
like
wow.
the first print run. The only ones that he were missing to make a complete set, which would have X times the value of this binder, right? The only ones he was missing were the handful of ones that I finessed off of him in really bad
Oof.
trades when we were kids on the playground. So yeah, that's a thing that's like a memory that I just wear with me. That's my cross to bear, is that I finessed one of my best friends out of some good cards back when we didn't know what was going on.
That's so funny. One thing I'm super jealous of is people who have siblings who had shared experiences growing up, because I have an older sister, but she couldn't care less about Pokemon, and oftentimes we didn't have a lot of shared interests. So when I hear about, like with your story with your brother and both of you getting Pokemon, I'm like, God, it's so cool. I'm so jealous of that, because I could only imagine. Obviously, I had some friends that I would share experiences with, but it's a different when it's a sibling. Yeah, super jealous.
Yeah, it was a wild time for us, and then we've kind of diverged a lot away from our Pokemon interest into the other games that we're that we're into.
It's cool though, and it's funny that you were like, "Oh, I remember it being this specific Game Boy," and your brother's like, "No, we got these ones," and you're like, "Oh, okay." It's strange how our memories can shift over time, and we kind of amalgamize them with other things, and then you don't fully remember the exact memory. So you kind of fully always trust memories, unfortunately, but we try our best. So, before starting the show, you told me that you had some opinions that you were interested to see how I and the audience would take them. So, we're going to hop into the Elite Four, which is a set of quote unquote 4 unique questions. I try not to repeat them with people. For you specifically, I don't think I have any that I had talked about with other guests before, but some of them are really funny or good that I like to use them with multiple guests. So, we're going to start off here. Teej, what came first? Surfetch'd becoming your favorite Pokemon, or the viral art you did of it? And why did this Pokemon of all Pokemon win you over so much?
So great question. And I was thinking about it because I was like, I'm actually not sure what happened. But then realistically, what probably happened was the art first, but just narrowly. And I think it's because, do you remember when Sword and Shield was coming out, like pre-release, they were putting out little trailers for like, here's a new one Pokemon that's going to be in the game, and here's you know what I mean? So we were
Yes.
getting a couple of those, and then they put out like the Surfetch look, right? Like teaser or whatever they were calling them. And I remember seeing it and almost immediately, because again, big far-fetched guy who's just like been neglected forever. And I was like out of my mind about it. And the fact that he didn't, which we can get into a little bit later when we're talking about more art specific stuff. But a big problem for me with a lot of Pokemon is I think they kind of got away design wise from what made Pokemon so good for a lot of those like middle gens. And I think Sword and Shield did an incredible job of kind of going back. If we look at like a lot of the new Pokemon that came in with that gen, I think a lot of them sort of picked up the torch from the OG design philosophies and sort of that direction. And so I was so excited when they showed Surfetch because he looked so dumb in like the best way possible. And it literally was my favorite type of evolution, which is just like, hey, here's this Pokemon that you love, and then it evolves into just a sort of bigger version of that thing with like some slight changes. And the art just kind of like I think it was a whole vibe, the way they had set up the teaser, and then knowing like this was going to be sort of like an England region. I don't know, it just kind of all hit me, and I was like, I think I might have even tweeted before I did the art. I was like, this dude needs to be in like a fireplace portrait. And then I just happened to like sketch this thing out, and I posted it, and it just exploded.
I was thinking back and I was wondering when I first learned about you on the internet, and I couldn't discern if it was this art or not that I found. And I was like, well, who's the artist? And then I found you. I was trying to figure that out because this thing was everywhere. Your painterly art of him in like military regalia. I don't know what you would call it. Um, but it's so funny when they finally go back to these like Gen 1, like you said, neglected Pokemon and give them evolutions, and sometimes people get sour about it and sometimes people love them. And I think Farfetch was one of the cases in which people were so stoked that Farfetch finally got some love, because to your point, I think people loved Farfetch because it was this dumb duck with a stick. It's like, I don't understand. It seems like a normal bird that just decided to hold something and now it's a Pokemon, which I thought was super funny at the time as a kid. And then with Surfetch kind of evolving on that. Do you think that Surfetch will always be your favorite Pokemon now?
I mean, the reality is most likely yes, because it's such a high bar for me. Like I genuinely was thinking about it, and I just look at the design, and it's so perfect to what I personally love about Pokemon design. Like, so for me, it's very hard to. I mean, it's possible, of course, because my favorite Pokemon before Surfetched was Hawlucha, which is another kind of
Sick.
newer one, and which I guess we can see a theme here. I like fighting types and I like birds, so you keep them coming. But and with Hawlucha, which I think does a very similar thing, which is like, hey, it's a very simple concept. It's a luchador wrestler that happens to be a bird, and then in the design that is reflected perfectly without being overly designed. And I think with Surface, they were like, hey, it's this bird who's very like knightly, right? Like he's very sort of like almost pompous in a way of like, oh,
Yeah.
my honor and all these things. And that is so funny to me. And in the design, they cut the top of the leak off, right? So he's got the shield to go with it now. And there was so much about that I just found so perfect. And then even just from just a general design perspective, right? Like his shape language is so good. It's so perfectly balanced with the broad barrel chest into the tiny legs, his head sitting right on top, which is then mirrored in the sort of like two bulbs on the leak of like the handle part that he's holding like a sword. and then the shield being that bright green, which is a nice contrast to the more, pale, like whitish body with the beak and the feet of the yellow. There's just so much about it that is so good that they would have to do something incredible, I feel like, which they definitely can, but it would have to be a really, really good design. And it's not even just the design because I it just everything fell into place with the Surfetched. I love birds. Fighting is my favorite type, and he just happened to tick every box. So like, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard for them to come up with another one. I feel like that is better for me.
Yeah, it was like created in a lab specifically for you in a lot of ways. It feels like.
Yeah, really, it feels that way.
That's awesome. So, like we talked about, Farfetch coming from the Kanto region. Gen 1 is often regarded as an overrated set of Pokemon to a lot of people. Whether that's true or not, it is often looked back on with a filter of nostalgia. As a character artist yourself, I'd love for you to pick a design from Gen 1 you're not particularly fond of and pitch to me what your redesign would be.
Okay, so this is a little bit odd, because I don't know. I feel like nostalgia kind of gets a bad rap nowadays. Because while I feel like I mean, it can definitely be weaponized, right?
Yeah,
And used for nefarious means. I also feel like nostalgia can be so potent and so powerful, and in a way, it can be such a fun way to remember and such a good reminder of things. And I think like we were just talking about in terms of like design language and how I felt like for a lot of gens, in my eyes, the sort of Pokemon design team or whatever, whoever's out there, kind of almost got lost from what I personally think it was like it was the perfect direction in terms of like, hey, it's an animal mixed with a sort of element or whatever, and like what can we design with that in mind? Things started getting out of hand, and I think so when I go back to Gen 1, I think it's in terms of just people thinking like it's a overrated or whatever. I think a lot of that comes from just, I mean, realistically, like, whatever your first Pokemon game is, you're probably gonna hold dear, right? And for
for
everyone
sure.
that's gonna be different. So for a lot of people, it unfortunately was Gen 1. Like me, was the first game, and we were there for it. So thinking about what one I would redesign, and I don't necessarily want to say it's because it's bad or like these designs were bad. There are a few that like subjectively I would say are bad just because I don't like them. But I really wanted to kind of get into the headspace of like what I think the purpose was of a lot of the designs in Gen 1, and then what Pokemon I felt like wasn't meeting that purpose and could be better.
Okay.
So looking at Gen 1, I think a lot of the Pokemon were designed in pairs because obviously X Pokemon is in red and X Pokemon was in blue. So they almost had to have like that sort of mirror to each other. And so I went to the Pokemon I chose was Magmar because I think Magmar to me I've always viewed as like the pair to Electabuzz, right? Like Electabuzz was the one for this game and Magmar was the one for this game. And Magmar to me as a design does not service the name or I feel like what the purpose of this Pokemon was supposed to be. So what and I think I even wrote it in my little note. I was like, Magmar looks dumb, parentheses, not in a good way. Like Farfetch, Surfetch look dumb in a good way. Magmar just looks dumb, not in a good way. So I was like, what would I do if I was, the Pokemon artist and how I would design Magmar? And I think what I came up with was it would have been similar, a bipedal kind of creature, almost like a dragonish type of thing, but he wouldn't have wings, so I don't know what you even call it, almost like a Godzilla kind of. But he would be his body would be made more of like stone or like volcano rock, right? And there would be like cracks and pieces where you could see the lava underneath. So almost like his body was actually lava, but obviously that would be a liquid, so you need to have a solid. So then that stone sort of developed around it, and that kind of created almost like the old like what is it, the Chinese like lions called, which I think they got into a little bit in one of the later games with like an Arcanine or something, right? Like they kind of designed a regional variant
Yeah.
to look kind of like that. So yeah, I would
Pursuing
do something.
Arcanine.
Yeah, so I would do something along that line, right? But still make it bipedal, still fits in line to be kind of that opposite of an Electabuzz. And I think it works a lot better than this weird hot rod flame design thing that Magmar is in the games. I don't know, it's weird. I don't like it.
Do you think they chose that, like the flame designs on him, to, like you pointed out, mirroring Electabuzz having the lightning bolts? Like, well, they're both
I
going to
think
have the
so.
thing that they do on them.
I think so, and I think that could also be another big part of why it doesn't work. But I think
Yeah.
that, like, because if you look at Electabuzz, it's not like the most insanely cool Pokemon, but I feel like it's cool enough. And I think
Oh, for sure.
lightning bolts are always going to look cool, like on a thing. Like, it's almost impossible to make a lightning bolt symbol or whatever not look awesome. So, whereas flames, I feel like it's very hard to make a flame pattern on a thing look cool. Like, it's very
Yeah.
easy to make a flame pattern on something look so bad. And you can combine that with this, like, the weird, like, ball eyebrows it's got. And like, it's just,
The
Magmar, I
duck
think, to me
mouth.
is, yeah, it's another one of those ones where I think it's just overly designed. I think they thought too much about it. They kind of got too in the weeds on it. And whereas I really think it should have been just simple.
So, in relation to that, how do you feel about Magby and Magmortar? It's pre-evolution and evolution.
Um, I, honestly, hold on, let me look because I feel like I know what one of them looks like.
Magby is just a little, obviously, but it's a little version of Magmar without the flames, really. It still has the weird bulbous head thing, the weird duck mouth.
Oh
I
yeah.
like Magmortar a lot more. I think it's just because, like, I'm a mark for, like, mech stuff, and I just like him having, like, the Mega Man arm. He still seems a little bit over-designed, but I like him much more than Magmar or Magby.
So looking at a picture of this right now, what I would say is I don't mind the pre-evolution. I just don't like the orb head. I think that could have been
Yeah.
better. But if you look at the sort of like the belly pattern, right? That is a good way to incorporate almost a flame without overdoing it. So I
Yeah.
like that. But I still think it's got issues with the weird claws. Like, I've never been a huge fan of, like, here's a rounded foot and we're just gonna jut nails out of it. Like, okay, I guess. But like, but then I look at this, like, and looking at the Magmortar, you can very clearly see, like, oh, a Magmar turns into this. I don't think there's enough going backward. So like, there's not a ton
Fair.
showing me that, like, the baby one turns into a Magmar. You know what I mean? And that, I think, is my biggest problem with a lot of these. And I know you say you like the mech stuff. We might get into it later if a question comes up. I am not a big fan of inorganic materials being bled into the bodies of organic creatures. It's a weird thing for me, man. I don't understand. It's too Digimon for me, which that's my hottest take, is I think most Digimon look awful.
So do you have a problem with Blastoise then? Because he has
I
obviously the
do.
big.
I think it's so
Okay.
dumb. Like, where do the guns
Interesting.
come
Okay.
from? Somebody explain to
Yeah.
me where these guns come from. Because I was talking to my brother about this over the weekend when I was telling him I was going to do the show. And I was like, what I would have done with Blastoise, you do the same thing. You just make him a big turtle. And instead of shooting the cannons from his back, he just shoots it from his mouth like a Godzilla breath, but it's water. I was like, you get the same exact thing without having to give him weird guns on the back. Or if you're so hellbent on keeping the guns, then Wartortle, which might be the worst mid evolution in the series, you have to give it one gun. And then Blastoise gets two guns. And then I guess you kind of explain where the guns are coming from.
So I'm assuming from a purely design perspective, that's your feelings on War Turtle.
My feelings on
Because
Wartortle are that it sucks. In
I
all
think
aspects,
Charmeleon
it
is the
sucks.
ugliest middle evolution. I hate Charmeleon. I think it's
I don't
so
I
ugly.
don't disagree because I do also think Charmeleon is not good, but if you look at Charmander to Charmeleon, it kind of tracks. You're like, okay,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
a little more angular. It's something is happening here. And then when you go from Charmeleon to Charizard, you're like, oh, okay, like this is just like, I don't know that I would buy that it's one step removed. I would say that's probably like maybe 3 steps removed from what Charmeleon is, but they only have 3 steps to work with, so fine. Whereas you go Squirtle to Wartortle, and you're like, okay, this is just a Squirtle with wings on its head for some reason. Like, all right. And then you go from Wartortle to Blastoise, and you're like, how did we get here? Where did the wings go? Where did the guns come from? The tail is just gone. The head shape is completely different now. We've just taken Bulbasaur's head and turned it blue and put it on this guy.
It's interesting.
Nothing.
You probably haven't gone back and looked at too much of the beta stuff. I'm assuming, like the beta artwork or
No.
the
My
original
brother brought that
artwork.
up to me, and I said, listen, I am canon only. If it wasn't in the game, it doesn't matter.
Well, no, to my point, the only reason I was bringing it up is if you go back and look at some of the beta designs for Blastoise and Wartortle, the thing you love most about Pokemon and that there's a clear through line of how Pokemon A becomes Pokemon C is much more clear in the beta stuff. And then to your point, they're just like, we're going to give him cannons. Like they're just like,
Well, that's
out of
my
nowhere,
thing
they're like,
is,
no,
like,
this guy's cooler with the guns.
and because my whole issue with it and why I don't like it, but I would have loved to be in the room when when you know what I mean, when these because like
Yeah.
how did we get here? Because like you said, the beta one's like, yeah, that tracks. Now, do I like it? Not really, but at least it it has some continuity
sense.
there.
Yeah.
Whereas what we got, no, absolutely not. And like, I'm not a big fan of starting starting bipedal and then ending up on all fours. Which I guess Blastoise isn't necessarily all fours because it stands up. But then you can also be like, but it could kind of be all fours. And I'm like, you got pick a lane.
Well, the opposite of that is a big conversation in the Pokemon community right now of Pokemon starting on all fours and then becoming bipedal, especially the starters. It seems
Don't
an
like
often
it.
common trope. Yeah. So the next question here, I gave you the task. You're a Pokemon gym leader, Teej. Tell me about the experience prospective trainers would be having at your gym. So what is your typing, your team, pick 3 to 6 Pokemon. What is the design aesthetic of the gym? And then what is your gym gimmick? A lot of gyms have gimmicks. Lieutenant Surgeback in Kanto had the switches in the trash cans you had to search through. Viola had the web carts you had to use to get back and forth. Sabrina infamously had the teleportation that would send you to a bunch of different rooms. Give me your layout of what your gym would be as a gym leader.
Okay. So this was actually maybe the easiest question in this whole thing for me because I have done this. So I don't know if you remember. There was a time on social media shortly after Sword and Shield released where it just, for a lot of artists, it just became kind of like a meme template to draw yourself as a trainer in that sort of vein of Sword and Shield and what your type would be. So I did that. And then I said, can I find this art? And I dug through the archives and I found it. So I am going to essentially just reread that. The only different thing I didn't have then was like the gym gimmick because that wasn't a thing that we were all thinking about.
Yeah.
But so my gym would be a fighting type gym, obviously. It has to be. So fighting type gym, I think I would have four Pokemon because which I know goes against my own philosophy. I feel like if you are the leader of a gym, it's insane to me that they don't all have 6 Pokemon because like what are we talking about? But
Yeah.
I only have 4, and I only have 4 because of a thing that I don't think is a real thing in Pokemon games, but would be awesome. So my first Pokemon up, right, would be Hitmonlee, a classic, one of my faves. So he's out there just kicking away.
Leo or Chan?
Yes, for
Okay.
a reason that we will get into on another question coming up.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Hitmonlee, 100%. He's going out there and he's doing his best. Is he the greatest Pokemon? Absolutely not. Are most fighting types not great from what people tell me about metas and things? Sounds like it. Do I care? Absolutely not.
No.
So he's out there doing his best. Next up, I've got this one, was a Sword and Shield creation, if memory serves, the Phalanx. I love this thing. It's insane to me that more people don't talk about this Pokemon.
The design of it is really smart and clever, I think.
It's so cool to me because, and again, I don't know the lore or whatever on the Phalanx. I look at it like each little guy is its own Pokemon, and they just decided to hang out. And they're like, this is me and my boys coming in here to fight. And I'm like, I just love it. So Phalanx would be my next Pokemon.
Well, the name
And
is so
then,
clever too, with it being a play on Phalanx, which is the military formation, which plays on the
yep.
Pokemon moving its guys around. I just thought it was a
And
really cool idea.
and not only that, it's also a play on like the word like links, like link, because they're linked
Yep.
up. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So listen, they were cooking with Sword and Shield, and I will say I've been saying that since day one. People hated on it. They did a lot of good stuff in that one. So they would be out there. And then my second to last Pokemon, my guy, my second in command, Hawlucha. He's coming out. And if you get through him, good luck. Because I love this guy. And then closing it out, obviously, the boy, the king of it all, my Surfetch, because this was back when, what was it, Dynamax, right? That was what they did, Sword and Shield. So for me, I was always bummed that there wasn't a Surfetch Dynamax. So the reason why I only had 4 Pokemon for my gym was because in my mind, my Surfetch would be Dynamaxed. And the only thing that would change, he would still be the same size. He's on the ground, except the leak would grow massive. It just shoots up into the sky like a skyscraper to pierce the heavens. That is my Dynamax Surfetched. And he swings that thing and it just creates like a hurricane. It's so over the top anime effects. You know what I mean? That was my whole logic on it. And then in
It's
terms of
surprising he didn't get a Dynamax, considering it was like a featured Galarian evolution that you would have figured that they would have given him one.
The thing is, though, the world is starting to come around. We've got that Surfetched and Pichu animation coming.
Oh, yeah.
And I think people are going to know, oh, man, maybe we treated this guy too harshly. And now all of a sudden you're going to see a lot more Surfetch fans. Like, oh, I love him. So I've been in the Surfetch trenches, okay? So yeah. And then in terms of a gimmick for the gym, I was thinking about this, and I don't know how it would work in a game, but I didn't really consider that too much. But I was like, I think it would be something like breaking like wooden boards or like chopping bricks, you know what I mean? Like you do in like a dojo. And I was like,
cool.
maybe you'd have to have like one of your Pokemon had to know like chop or something, or you know how they have like the what is it, TMs or whatever, that it's like cut and all that. Like you'd have to, yeah, like you'd have to know one, but in order to get through, like your Pokemon would have to have a high enough like attack stat to break like 3 boards or 4 boards or whatever. I don't know. That could be like a fun way to
maybe
do it,
mashing a button right to get through the board, and depending on how strong your Pokemon is the like less you have to spam the button. I don't know.
Yeah, that could
it seems like a cool idea though. And then the design, is it's a gym? Like, does it look like an actual gym, quote unquote?
So my thought was it would look almost like a combination of like a modern day sort of like boxing gym with some sort of like old school karate dojo style vibes. Like if you ever played Shenmue, like the dojo on his house where like he goes and he finds his dad getting killed by the bad guy whose name is escaping me right now. But yeah, a classic old style dojo, but with some sort of a bit of modern flair to it.
You were talking about how gym leader should have 6 Pokemon. The thing I always found interesting, and they didn't do this in the games. They never explain this in the games for some reason. But in the show, they explain that basically, depending on how many badges the trainer has, is how many Pokemon the gym leader will use against them. It's like if a kid comes in and he only has like no badges, then the gym leader would use 2 Pokemon, right? They assume, okay, they're kind of new to it. Whereas if a gym leader comes in, or a trainer comes in with like 4 badges, they're like, oh, well, I'm going to use my whole team of 6. And I wonder if now that the games might go more towards, it was especially this with Scarlet and Violet, more of like an open world design, if maybe that becomes conducive to the overall design of how the gym leaders approach fighting the player. Of like, oh, they only have 2 badges, I'm not going to use my full team of 6. And depending on how you approach all the gym leaders, they might have more. So that was interesting that they always explain that in the cartoon, but they never explained it in the games at all. Of like, why am I going up against this guy and he has 2 Pokemon and he's supposed to be like the 6th gym leader?
And like that makes sense, obviously, from like a sort of game difficulty standpoint, right? But at the
Yeah.
same time, I would kind of push back on that logic a little bit because I'm like, you have all those fights in the gym before you get to the leader, right? And it's like if
Yeah.
you want to have those guys have a range of like 2 to 4 or whatever, completely fine. But it's to me, I'm like, you are supposed to be the leader of this gym. You are the head honcho. So for
Yeah.
you not to be using every resource available to you to consistently defend that gym and that title, it just never made sense to me. Maybe it's my sports side of my brain kind of bleeding in, being like, what are you doing? Why are you not trying to do everything you can to have an advantage in this battle right now? But
Exactly. And to the sports side, I'm not going to be going out there and starting 3 point guards on my starting lineup. Why do these gym leaders have like 3 or 4 of the same Pokemon?
that's another thing. And
That
like
frustrates me too.
It's like Gen 1, I kind of get it, right? Because there's only so many
Limited.
Pokemon. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, what can we do? But the later gens, like, no shot. There should be zero dupes if you're a gym leader. Like, what are we doing?
100%. I agree. The last question here, we've kind of touched on it throughout. I'd love to hear your take on the conversation centered around Pokemon who seemingly have clothing as part of their design, but also happen to be a part of their actual biology. Some feel it's immersion breaking, others feel it doesn't matter at all. What do you think from both the design and in-world slash lore canonical perspective on this?
Okay. Personally, don't like it. But I feel like there are examples in the games of that I do think it works because it's not so terrible. So and I looked it up because I couldn't remember the name of him, so I looked it up the other day. So Hariyama, right? This is a very cool. It's almost like a sumo Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
Uh I think it works in this one because it has the in quotes clothing parts of it, but it does it in a way where I could also believe it to be it's like organic because it could be played off as like this is it's kind of fur around its waist or or whatever.
Or Carapace
Whereas
or whatever, yeah.
yeah, whereas if I look at something like Cinderace, right? Or like a Hitmonchan, I don't like these because it literally just looks like they put clothes on. Like they just I put some pants on or like in Hitmonchan's case, what I really don't like is like, why do you have shoulder pads? Where did those come from? And then it's like, am I supposed to believe that your hands are just these orbs? How do you do
Like
anything?
boxing gloves.
And it's funny because I was just like, when I was reading over the questions, I wish I had say I was just like sketching with my nephew about what we were talking about because he loves Pokemon, and we were talking about it, and I was just kind of like noodling around. And I wish I had the paper, but I was like, this is what I would do. The only thing I would change for Hitmonchan to make it not awful would be get rid of the shoulder pads, and then the boxing gloves wouldn't be gloves. They would have normal hands, maybe like 3-fingered hands or something. So that way, when they did make a fist, it could still look like a ball, but it would look like a hand when it wasn't fighting. And
Yeah.
then the like color wise, I almost was like, you almost kind of bring the shirt up so it's almost crop top ish, and then the legs you almost just flip flop. So like instead of it looking like shorts, it almost looks like shoes. And essentially it's like you make that center section like you would on like an insect or whatever, right? Where it's like this is your sort of underbelly or whatever.
Yeah.
Uh and I was like, and then you just kind of do like a little wavy pattern or something separating the two colors so it almost doesn't look so hard cut off. And I was like, boom, there you go. You've got a Hitmonchan that doesn't look like it put, a tunic on and some gloves. Which again, I am not, and as we talked about with the Farfest, I'm not against a Pokemon that has props in its design because like that's funny to me. But a Pokemon that's like, hey, I am this organic creature that all of a sudden sprouted metal guns or gloved hands. Like, where did this come from? How did we get here?
Well, Machamp 2 is one you didn't mention where it's like he's wearing underwear with a WWF
Yeah.
belt on.
And that's one of the ones where it's like, from a design side, I get it because you're making a game and it would look weirder without like the underwear on him because you're like, what is this? Because he looks so humanoid that you're like,
Human,
what? This is
yeah.
weird. But there's another thing I feel like you could do, which is like you essentially just make the belt the top part of the shorts instead of them being two different things. And the shorts you instead make almost again like thigh length shorts that you would get in like
Yeah.
basketball length shorts, but they're just like a skin tight thing or something. I don't know. Again, nothing's gonna be perfect when you start to blend that sort of creature, humanoid, all these things, but I think in some of these examples, like I Hitmonchan, or like we said, the Cinderace one, which I have gripes about all three of the starters from Sword and Shield and how they evolve, but I think Cinderace is definitely up there in terms of like this is just a guy now.
Another Pokemon who I think does the clothing where it fits for me, for the most part, is Frostlass. I don't know if you're familiar with that Pokemon. It's
Frostlass.
based
I'm
off of
sure I
a
have.
Japanese mythology of like a ghost girl. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and it's supposed to look like it has kind of like a kimono on.
Well, yeah, but see, but that, like you said, that definitely blends into the organic of it, though, because
Yeah,
like visually, like a silhouette, it has that, but you could also buy that as like, oh, it just kind of drops off into like a fin almost, or you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like it's floating around, so it doesn't need legs. That's fine. Yeah, it just makes sense.
It's funny when you talk about these things because I think oftentimes most people probably do not care. Unfortunately, people don't look enough or care enough, and they just like their Pokemon person. But
Oh yeah.
the more you think about it and you look at the design, it's like, well, yeah, that doesn't really make sense, or why is that a thing? And um, another point of contention for people, along with this conversation of having clothing in their designs, are inanimate objects which become Pokemon. Which to me, with the ghost types, I think that's where you can make the most leeway in terms of explaining off having real clothing as part of the design, because oftentimes ghost Pokemon are spirits like taking over and possessing things. So it makes sense if like a ghost Pokemon had clothing as part of its design, because that's not really the Pokemon, right? It's just whatever it's possessing at the
Yeah.
time. But they haven't really done that too much with that typing,
I think.
as far as my memory serves.
Well, I think another thing too is like I don't even mind something like a Trubbish, right? Which is essentially just a
Yeah,
bag of trash. Because the guy look at that, it's like, oh well, it's like that's just essentially like evolution. Like humanity evolved, and then we have trash bags and these things. So this creature evolved to mimic the visual of one of these things to better blend in with the
exactly.
world around them. It's when you get this Pokemon who all of a sudden like, oh, I've evolved and now I have pants, and it's like, well, what? Why? Like that's not, and only because that's not inherent. As we go back to like the squirrel talk, that's not really inherent anywhere else. You know what I mean? It's almost like they just do these things because they need to make the next step look different.
Yeah.
And in terms of like we were talking about with the sword and shield ones, it annoyed me a bit because I felt like with sword and shield, especially for the first time in a long time, I felt like the starters, and I mean the other new Pokemon as well, but the starters especially, they got back to what made those OG starters so good. Very simple designs that were very like friendly but unique, and they weren't over designed. They were very clear of what they are as a monkey, a bunny, and a, I don't know, a little like gecko lizard type thing. But then you look at the evolutions and they fell right back into the trap of like over designed stuff. And I'm like, why? We had it so good.
Yeah, I was most disappointed with Rillaboom because I really wanted, when I heard the
Oh
leaks and
yeah.
the rumors that it was going to be a gorilla, I'm like, oh, sick, we get a gorilla starter. And I just didn't really love the design. Obviously, I'm not a huge soccer guy, so the Score Bunny evolution line didn't really do much for me, and I'm never really gravitated towards fire types. And then when I saw that Sobble became an incel lizard, I was like, I can't do this.
Oh.
I can't. Yeah,
The
the funny thing is the idea of it Dynamaxing and becoming a sniper, such a cool idea in theory, but the way they executed it, I don't think works at all, really.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think just like looking at them quickly here, I think outside of the first forms, I don't think I really like any of the Sword and Shield starters like
Same.
mid or final evolution, which is a bummer because I think the first forms are some of my favorite in a long time. Like when they showed Grookey, I was over the moon because I've always been a grass starter person more often than not. And I was so stoked to get the monkey because my brain just exploded with ideas of like, oh, what could this turn into? And I try not to look at like leaks and things ahead of time because I don't like, I like to just figure it out on my own. And when it evolved the first time, I was like, okay. I was like, it's still kind of like him. Okay, whatever. And then when it turned into the third form, I was like, what are we doing here?
One Pokemon, before we move on to our team building exercise, one Pokemon I wanted to get your opinion on, because to me it seems like it does it well, is Decidueye and the Hisuian version, where Decidueye, the base version, looks like it has a cloak with its feathers and also over its head with the leaves and stuff, which I think is done well. And then its Hisuian design is meant to have one of those, I don't know the actual name for it, but those very like round circular hats that samurai and stuff used. His
Oh
design
yeah,
seems
yeah.
like it does it decently well, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on how they implemented the clothing, quote unquote, look.
I like it. I am a big fan of this one. I remember the game. I don't remember what gen it was because I'm so bad at it. So it was Gen 7 for these ones. So
Yes, Sun and Moon.
this is another this is another one of those ones where like I played a bit but not much because a lot of those sort of like Gen 8 was the one where I really came back and I played through the whole thing, and then I've done 9 and so on. But I remember playing this one a bit at launch, and I picked Rowlet. Or is it Rowlet? Right? That's what it's called.
Yes, yeah.
I picked that one because I was like, again, grass person. I love birds. I said I'm all about this, and then got to the middle evolution, and I was like, oh man, this sucks. I was like, this is bad. What are we doing here? And then they won me back with the final one. And like you said, it's very clearly like a hood, right? So it's like, oh, well, that's an item of clothing, but because it's designed in such a way that followed a sort of realistic, in terms of like the game world trajectory, you immediately don't think about it as a hood. You're just like, oh, it just looks cool because it just
Yeah.
works. And I think with the alternate version for the, because that was what Arceus, right? Where this one was.
Yes.
And I think so. Even looking at that one again, it followed a structure that made sense. And like you said, it's clearly a hat, but because the way it was designed and the shapes of it, it looks organic enough to match the rest of the feathers and things on its body. So you just kind of don't think about it. And I think when it's done well, like I mentioned earlier with like a Hariyama or something, you don't think about it as clothing. You just look at it as part of the design, and it just all works.
Yeah,
Whereas
very true.
the ones where it isn't done that way, or maybe, excuse me, not done as well, it's very clearly like, why does this Scorbunny thing have pants on, or why does Hitmonchan have gloves and shoulder pads? Like, why are these here? So,
Yeah.
that I think that's the part that frustrates me the most, because they've shown repeatedly that they can do it very well. But so it's when you get one of these ones that does it so bad, you're like, mate, who was on vacation when this thing was designed? You know what I mean? We need to get them back in the
Yeah.
office.
So one of the last segments here is team building exercise. So I have my guests pick a fictional character. Could be from video games, books, film, television. We build the perfect Pokemon team for that chosen character. We focus on what Pokemon most fit the core of that character. Could be vibes, personality, aesthetic, lore of the world that the character is from. Each of us will present 3 Pokemon, but come with a list of 3 to 6 just to safeguard and make sure we have 6 distinct total choices. So Teej picked Hellboy, which outside of the Ron Perlman films, I'm not too familiar with. I'm a comic guy, but I've just never gotten around to reading the Hellboy comics, unfortunately.
Oof.
So my only exposure to the character Teej is the Ron Perlman films. So partially, I'm going from aesthetics of what team would look cool for Hellboy to have, but some of the minor personality stuff I remember about him, I'm trying to pick as well for my team. So hopefully, I do justice for you. Why did you pick Hellboy?
So I picked Hellboy because Hellboy is, I don't know if I would say he's my number one, but he's definitely close to the top in terms of like just fictional characters of all time.
Cool.
I love the comics. It's, as like an artist illustrator myself, like growing up, like I've always been a huge fan of Mignola's work, and then getting into Hellboy as I got a little bit older. I think it was one of those things where like as a young kid doing art, I would look at his work in Hellboy and be like, I don't understand why this is people like this. Like, it's so simple, blah blah blah. But as I got older and I understood exactly what he was doing and how sort of masterful he was doing stuff, I got a bigger appreciation for it. And then when I finally like dug in and started reading the books, I was like, oh man, this is like really good stuff. And it's, Hellboy for me is the ideal way to do world building, where it's like you only solve the questions you need to solve in the moment, because then you leave yourself a back door in case you need to expand or whatever. Whereas I think a lot of people, they get so hung up on making connections between every single aspect right away, and then you leave yourself no wiggle room to play around. And I think with Hellboy, it was it was such a combination of things, like the visuals of it all I loved. I'm a big fan of like horror and folklore stuff, and he does such a great job of bringing in that element and even like obscure stuff of that from all across the world. And yeah, and I was just like, when you'd asked me the question, there was a few things popped in mind, but I was like, I don't know that any of them are gonna be as sort of like not anti, but like so away from, because I thought about like Link because I'm a big Zelda fan. And then I was like, and I was thinking of some other characters, and I was like, I just don't think they're gonna be separate enough from
Hmm.
Pokemon. So I was like, I think Hellboy would be a fun one. And then I was really spinning my wheels trying to be like, what Pokemon would make sense here. So that was fun.
You're up. Who's your first choice for his team?
Okay, so my first choice, Pokemon for Hellboy was Honedge, because as you mentioned, you've not read the books, but you've seen the movies, which we won't get into my sort of hot take about those movies, but I think there's elements of them that might track for my reasoning here. The reason I picked Honedge was because it's essentially, a spirit that's inhabited this sword, right? Like so essentially it's a haunted sword or a magic sword, I guess, if we want to get even more broad with it. And that is a Hellboy thing that fits perfectly. Like you could write a Hellboy story that's like, hey, here's this haunted sword, and I got to go do a thing with it, and I'd be like, cool, that's 100% a story that could exist.
I like that. Yeah, I was doing some cursory research on it, but obviously the comics are so extensive. There's so much to sift through. And I remember reading something about Excalibur and swords and stuff. So I figured I had Honage on my list later on. So I'm glad you knocked it off. Um, my first choice, I think, is the probably if you asked anybody who is like partially familiar with Hellboy, this would be the Pokemon they think of first because it's the most devil quote unquote looking Pokemon, and I also think aesthetically it'd look cool by his side, and that's Houndour slash Houndoom. Um, I used to call Houndour Houndour, and then I realized that it's a play on the word dower, right? So because obviously it turns into Houndoom. Um, I just thought it was a cool looking Pokemon. Still fire. Seems like a pretty good typing for Hellboy. And like I said, aesthetically, it just looks so badass. So it's standing next to him would look
That's
cool.
uh that's a good one. I think is when I was talking to him, like I said, when I was talking to my brother about all this stuff, he mentioned that one. It didn't end up on my list because I had just other ones that came to mind. But yeah, that 100%. Because again, I always tried to look at it like, could I see a Hellboy short story written that would involve either this Pokemon specifically or like a creature that essentially is that Pokemon, but just not, copyright free version of that Pokemon, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I could 100% see a story where it's like Hellboy has to, wrangle, a group of these hellhounds, essentially, and they just happen to look like, Houndooms and stuff. So yeah, that's 100%. I could get behind that one.
Who is your second choice following Honedge?
So my second choice is again similar related. I was kind of thinking of what could be stories, and I went with Obama Snow
Oh, sick.
because I thought, again, same thing. I could see a story of Hellboy going to fight like a Yeti, right? Like that just makes sense to me.
I love the typing on Obama Snow. And yeah, it'd be like this. It could be totally one of those storytelling scenarios where it seems like an awful creature, and then Hellboy just takes the time to figure out what exactly is going on, and it's completely like misunderstood in the whole situation.
Oh yeah, and that fits right in with the type of Hellboy stories that I love.
So, like I said, my familiarity with Hellboy is prominently from the Guillermo del Toro films. And one of the things, I don't know if this extends to the comics, but one of the things in those movies is all of his gadgets always mess up. And that's always a point of frustration for him, is that all of the gadgets he's trying to use just don't work when they're supposed to. And it's kind of like the comedic relief of a lot of moments. So to me, I found it really funny if he had to use like a slacking because Slacking obviously is like a very powerful Pokemon, but its problem is that you can only attack with it every other turn. And I think that'd be really funny. And like I said, it fits into this idea of his gadgets messing up, where he has something powerful he can use at his disposal, but there's a drawback that frustrates him. And I think Slacking kind of fits that mold in terms of a Pokemon for his team.
Yeah, that's a good call. I mean, it's definitely more of an element of the movies, which again makes sense because you sort of need those
That's
beats
all I
in a
know.
movie.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, especially going off like you said, with that being your sort of primary knowledge of the character, like that 100% fits. And I think it's just funny, like because things like that similar happen in the comics where like things just kind of don't work out or like things go sideways for Hellboy. Like this whole character of like nothing is easy.
Yeah.
So just the idea, like you said, of not being able to completely rely on this Pokemon, like that, yeah, that fits.
And your third and final choice.
Okay, so I've got a few here, so I'm kind of trying to decide of which way I want to go. And I think what I want to do is I'm gonna go with Machamp.
Okay.
Because one of my favorite Hellboy stories, it's like a side story, is Hellboy in Mexico. And it's a story where Hellboy goes down to Mexico on a mission or something. I don't remember. It's been a while since I read it, but he essentially goes down there. It takes place in like the 80s, I think, and he ends up like getting lost and meeting this group of like luchador wrestlers, and he starts wrestling with them. He becomes like a master luchador wrestler for a while in this like huge drunken binge while he's down there. And then it turns out like one of the wrestlers becomes like a vampire because like he gets cursed on. It's a whole thing, but it's a great story. It's so fun. And I was like Machamp because it kind of harkened back to that a little bit, and I just think it could be a fun Pokemon to have around to kind of sort of like beat around with, you know what I mean? Kind of like they could fight
Mm-hmm.
each other like for fun and things like that. I don't know, just thematically it felt right.
You want to throw out real quick before I get to my final choice? Your honorable mentions. They didn't make the cut. Real quick.
Sir, so I had Gengar in there. That was my most obvious one. I was like, oh, Gengar because he's a ghost Pokemon. Hellboy fights sort of paranormal things, so we get a Gengar in there. And then I had Dusclops. Again, similar thing. I was kind of thinking of Pokemon that are kind of like cryptid or ghost sort of adjacent, right? And then my last one was Mew, because he's kind of cat looking. And again, that was more in the movies than the comics, but there is a thing of like Hellboy with an affinity towards cats, and I was like, he would just think this little cute thing is probably cool.
Oh, cool. I'm glad that we're getting both sides of the very limited knowledge on my end, and somebody who's like a really big fan, because we're at least we're getting aspects of why he would choose certain Pokemon. Because, like I said, my knowledge is an inch deep in terms of the world, and I know there's so much to Hellboy. So I tried my best with this last pick. I'll do my honorable mentions real quick. So I had Marshadow kind of in the aspect of the supernatural and stuff. I just think it's a cool looking little cutie. Mabastiff, which is one of the newer Pokemon in the latest gens. It's just this old dog. It's just an old dog. Just the image of Hellboy walking around with this really big old Mastiff. It just seemed natural to me. Absol, if you're unfamiliar, Absol is basically misunderstood as a Doombringer, but in reality, Absol shows up to alert people of tragic events going to happen. And to your point, it seems like it could be a storyline where Hellboy shows up to this place and everyone thinks this creature is showing up and creating catastrophic events, and then it ends up being like, no, it's just letting people know the events are about to happen, right? One of those misunderstood storylines. But the one I'm going to pick is Mimikyu, solely because I think there's a shared connection there of, uh, you know, I don't know if you know the whole lore behind Mimikyu, Teej, but it hides in a costume because it's so quote unquote ugly that it scares people. So it hides in a costume to prevent that from happening, and it just wants to be understood and liked. And I think to some aspect, Hellboy kind of deals with that, of people seeing his appearance and being like, oh, this guy's like an evil, bad person, when he's entirely the opposite of that. And he has to deal with the world's judgment constantly. So I think if he came around to a Mimikyu and understood why it was the way it was, he maybe have a little bit of shared trauma there and want to have it by its side, since they kind of have to deal with the same judgment from the outside world.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. That's definitely the sort of like uh emotional support pet choice, right? Of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we're both mistreated, misunderstood by the society around us. So let's, join together with our shared traumas and sort of live a peaceful existence. No, those are good picks.
I also love big brooding heroes with like tiny little cutesy creatures. I always think that dynamic is always super awesome. Lastly, let's get to forced evolution. If you could change anything about the Pokemon franchise, what would it be?
So I thought about this for a while, and what I picked, it 100% would not work in the real world because these are games and things. They need to be marketed, right? Like marketing is a big part of selling these things. So what I would do wouldn't work in the real world context, but I would not reveal anything about the games before release. The only thing you would get would be the name and an image of the region map, like a cool painting of the map. And the cover of the games would be that map with the logo on it, and that would be it. You wouldn't know what the starters are, you wouldn't know what the legendary is, you wouldn't know anything. Because I think I tried to think back of like why a lot of people, like we were talking about nostalgia earlier, right? And I think why a lot of people have such a nostalgia, especially for Gen 1, because it was the first one. So even like we talked about, where you asked me if I had picked Squirtle because obviously I picked Blue, so obviously I must have left Blastoise. But because we didn't know anything, I had no idea those were related. I was just like, hey, there's
Yeah.
a thing on this cover. So whatever I could do to find a way to inject a little bit more of that mystery into the games, I think is important, because nowadays you got lead up into new games, right? You get a trailer showing people are dissecting what's a new Pokemon, what's this, what's that. You've got legendaries on the cover, which I have a whole issue with legendaries. I don't think they really seem legendary, but and I think there's so much of the games is shown to us, whether willingly or unwillingly, ahead of time, that sense of discovery is lost in a lot of ways. And I just, for me, in the way I enjoy games and the way I enjoy media in a lot of respects, is I like to discover things on my own. And so the more of that I can get from these games, I think I would be more excited about.
Yeah, I think that's a problem we face in almost all entertainment mediums of showing too much, whether it's movies, video games, television. It's just trailer after trailer, just showing the entire thing. And, I'm a little bit guilty of it too, because I think sometimes it's a little bit of self control where you can kind of try to avoid it as much as you can. And the way the internet works, you can only avoid things as much as you can. But I am so interested in knowing the final evolution just because I don't want to pick a starter I like and then have the final evolution be something I absolutely don't. But to your
Yeah.
point, a sense of discovery is so magical, and it is something we've lost as we've gotten older and as society has evolved to more of an internet-based culture. I do think, though impossible, a media blackout shadow drop Pokemon would be super sick. Because you'd also have the positive side of the internet is you'd have that ability to share with your friends your discoveries with one another and find out things and figure out things. And hey, have you kind of figured out when or how this Pokemon evolves? No, I'm gonna try this. Okay, I'll try this. We don't have that anymore, really. And you would have that on the playground, right? Talking to your
Yeah.
friends, discussing what is Mew under that truck by the SSN, is all those mysteries and theories we had as kids when they first showed Meryl, and everyone's like, is that Pika Blue? I don't know if you remember that whole thing
Oh, I
when they first.
remember.
Yeah. So I'm with you. I think a sense of mystery is good, and we've kind of lost that in a magical world. Yeah, where they didn't have to market everything a million times. It'd be nice to have a shadow drop like that. But unfortunately, we get to a point where these things are so big that they can't afford to do that, which you can make the case that they could afford to do that because people are going to buy it regardless. But yeah, I like that. I like that idea. If one day we get it.
I
Lastly,
know.
here, Teej, return to sender. Basically, is there anything you'd like to ask me about Pokemon, my relationship with it, anything else?
So I have two questions. One would be, as we mentioned, like, so my intro to Pokemon was Gen 1 and also completely unrelated to the anime. And I think so I'd like to know like a little more, expansion on your introduction to Pokemon and where that came from. And then
Okay.
what is your favorite Pokemon?
Okay, so my introduction was, I remember waking up one day on like a Saturday or Sunday, and I was flipping through the cartoons eating cereal, and I came across one of the episodes of Pokemon, and I sat there and I watched, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And I believe it was the first episode. It was just a lucky rerun where I caught it, and it was the first episode where Ash gets to pick his Pokemon. And I was like, oh, this is neat. And that next, I think it was a couple of weeks from when school was starting, I went to school and there was kids showing off these trading cards. And at the time, I didn't really know much about trading cards that weren't sports cards. I was into as a kid getting football and basketball trading cards, and I was collecting them. And then I saw these cards, and I was like, "Oh, these aren't sports. What are these?" And the kids were trading them around. And I think the first Pokemon card I ever saw was the the Muck from. No, it couldn't have been Muck because that was Jungle. Maybe it was Muck, but I remember it was a green card, and I was like, "Oh, it's interesting." And I didn't recognize that Pokemon because they were talking about it being Pokemon. I was like, oh, I saw the show a couple of weeks ago, and I don't recognize that Pokemon. And as they're flipping through the cards, then I saw the typical starters. I was like, oh, that's neat. And a kid at that point at recess whipped out his Game Boy, and he's like, yeah, there's a game version. Let me show you. And he turned it on and he showed me. And my mom, as awesome as she was, like, I'm similar to you where we didn't grow up with a lot of money, right? We grew up poor, and having a single mom, it was pretty tough. And I don't know how she did it to this day. You probably have the same feeling with your mom, but they just made things work when it seemed like it was impossible in terms of providing the things for us that we wanted. And it was like a week or two later, it was a surprise. It was probably around, it must have been for my birthday. My birthday's on September 21st. So school started around late August. That makes sense, the timeline here. It was a couple of weeks later that I got home from school, and she's like, get your stuff unpacked. I want to show you something. And I go to the living room. She's like, I know your birthday isn't for a week or two, but I wanted to give you this present. And I went and opened it, and it was a Game Boy. It was the green one. It was like the tealish green one. Remember we were talking about earlier the color choices for the Game Boys. And it was Pokemon Blue. And up until this point, I had already marked out that Bulbasaur was going to be my starter because I loved him way more than the other ones. And then I knew that there was only Pokemon Red and Blue, and I argued with my friends, how come there's not a green version? It's not fair that Bulbasaur doesn't get a green version of the game. So I ended up getting Blue, but I ended up going with Bulbasaur. And from that point on, it's been a constant thing. It was about a year later, we moved, and my next door neighbor, my best friend Daniel, he's my about 8 months younger than me, super into Pokemon too. And from that point to this point, every time a new generation comes out, it's just worked out that we're interested in the other version of the game. Like he was a gold guy, I was a silver guy. Even most recently, I was a violet guy. He was a scarlet guy. And that connection with my best friend over these years to a series we love, obviously we've fallen in and out of it over the years, has really kept my familiarity with it really strong. And I don't know, when you go back and you look kind of the domino effect, I don't know if I wouldn't have met him and gotten that strong of a relationship with Pokemon with him and trading and talking about the games and figuring things out, if I would have become I'm doing a Pokemon podcast right now, right? So I don't know if it would have been the same where I would have been as enthralled with the series in terms of what it meant for me as a child and as an adult and connecting with people if it wasn't for him. So it's without my best friend, I don't know if Pokemon would be what it is today. But yeah, that's I guess how I found out about the series long-windedly. And what's your second question?
What is your favorite Pokemon now, and maybe a little bit of why you like them the most.
Okay, so I have two, and it depends on the day. I go back and forth on Arcanine and Ivysaur. So Arcanine, I like cats and dogs, and design-wise, Arcanine is kind of a molding of both. I just think it's a really dope design. It's a canine tiger essentially with, whenever they depict it in the show and stuff, its mane looks so fluffy and soft. And there was an artist comic that came out probably in the mid 2010s. You may have come across it because it was pretty popular. It was a soldier on the front lines of war, and he gets sent out as like a young 18-year-old soldier. I'm reading all this with context clues, and he has a Growlithe with him. And then the next panel is he's going to like become a medic, and his Growlithe is still with him, but it looks a little bit older. And then the third panel is him as a full-blown combat medic, and it's an Arcanine now. And then the last panel is him dead, essentially, and the Arcanine laying on his chest. And I thought that was such a beautiful, sad comic, right? Just showing this journey with this guy and this Pokemon. And I just thought that forever the design was cool, and then I learned that it was supposed to initially be a legendary, and then it wasn't. I've just always loved its design. And then with Ivysaur, I loved Bulbasaur growing up, like I talked about. unfortunately, Venusaur is a bit of an Uggo. You know, the giant toad. It's a bit of an Uggo. With Ivysaur, it's not much different of a design than Bulbasaur, but I think the bulb on its back makes such a difference. The overall design for me, I like it a lot more. The splash of color on the back, the pink, I think, and it's a little bit more confident in itself, and it's a little bit more pet-like in the way it acts. So Ivysaur has always been the one I go for. Even early on, there were points where I would give it an Everstone so it wouldn't evolve into a Venusaur just because I liked Ivysaur so much. Um, for me, the bulb on Bulbasaur's back is cute and everything, but I think the flower adds a lot more to the overall design. And I think that's it. That's why it's my favorite.
And
Hello?
those are good points. I was listening. I muted because my dogs did start kicking off right at the end.
Oh, okay.
So we can cut this last bit until
Yeah.
they settle down and the delivery guy leaves, I guess. And then we can just do closing, I guess. But I was like, he's rolling. I was like, let me just mute the mic so you can just keep going.
I'll throw in a last part too, so we can kill some time real quick. So, those are my two like initial favorites. Obviously, they're from the Kanto region. Over the years, I've gone favorites in each generation, but those are like my two favorites. The cool thing is, kind of like you with Surfetch, very rarely does a new Pokemon gen come around and you find somebody that's like one of your absolute favorites. And that happened to me with Scarlet and Violet, and that's Tinkaton. I don't know if you're familiar with Tinkaton, but it's this cute little fairy steel type. I love the juxtaposition of this little adorable thing with this giant warhammer. I just think it's so funny. The typing too, from a strategic standpoint, is unreal. It's like super unfair, has very little weaknesses at all. And it's the only Steel Fairy type we have since Klefki, the key Pokemon that everyone throws a fit about on the internet. And yeah, it's kind of ascended itself into close to my top 5 Pokemon of all time, which I never thought would be the case. The only other Pokemon that's come close is like Metagross, and that's because I don't know if you've ever seen shiny Metagross. Regular Metagross is like a light navy blue with the X on its front face being like a stone gray, and then the shiny version is like this chrome silver, and the X is gold, and you get it in the game. And I just thought it was such a sleek looking design. I'm also a huge X-Men fan. That's like one of my favorite comic book series. So I'm like, oh, it's like, you know, it has the X symbol on it. A little bit nerdy about that.
This is the X-Men Pokemon.
100%, yeah. I just like its design too, and even in the Pokédex, it talks about it having like 4 brains, and it uses it to solve complex equations and stuff, which I thought was super fascinating. So, yeah, I was so stoked that Tinkaton was a new Pokemon I fell in love with, because whenever a new generation comes up, I go, oh, I like that Pokemon, I like that Pokemon. Obviously, it's relegated to the starters a lot of the times, but with Tinkaton, I was like, oh, I love this little guy so much.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought that one up because that was similar for me in Scarlet and Violet. I actually wasn't so hot on a lot of the new ones that were added for that gen, which was a real bummer for me because, like as I mentioned with Sword and Shield, I don't know that there was a new one that was added in that game. Maybe a couple that I was like, oh, I don't really care for this one, but most of them I was like, oh, these are all very good. So going from that to then Scarlet and Violet, where I enjoyed the game. Obviously, I'm not saying it's perfect. I am well aware that the game had a lot of issues, but a lot of the new ones, I was just like, oh, none of these are really doing anything for me. But the beauty of me having missed so many of the games, like in the middle gens, a lot of these Pokemon are just new to me because I don't know what they are.
Oh, fair, yeah.
So, but Tinkaton was one that I got early on, and as you mentioned, like even just being as an artist, like I mean, you've seen a lot of my work too. It's like little guys with big swords or whatever, like that sort of dynamic aesthetically is a very big thing for me. So I had to have one of those on my team for sure.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode, Teej. Shout out once again. I know you're very busy, you have a lot going on, so I like having. We talked about. I'm trying to get as many different perspectives on the show, and having an artist on was awesome, especially specifically to talk about designs because that's something that I think not a lot of people focus on necessarily, and it's cool to get perspective on why you think a design works, why you think it doesn't work, what you would do differently. And to your point, a lot of times it's subjective. People, you know, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Art in general is subjective, so people are going to like things that other people don't. I'm very excited that you gave your take on the whole clothing thing because that is such a hot topic with people that I'm glad to hear your perspective on it. Before we get going, can you please let everyone know where they can find you and all the work you're doing?
Sure. You can find me online on most social platforms. I'm just Teeketch, Teeketch. That's me pretty much everywhere. And what I'm doing, well, kind of a lot. I just recently, but not too recent, released a video game along with some folks called Piece by Piece, which coincidentally was also the name of another video game that released 2 days after us, which has been a funny coincidence. Um, but yeah, so you could find that the one that I did the art for is the one with the little fox character in it. So that was the big thing that's finally done. Outside of that, just kind of continuing my work of working on whatever projects come my way. I work with a lot of indie game developers and things, which is always fun. So yeah, just doing more of that stuff as long as they'll let me.
And yeah, you'll find the links to his work in the description on the YouTube version of this podcast. If you're into, if you're listening to this, you like Pokemon. If you like cute little guys, Teeg kind of has that market cornered in a lot of ways with a lot of your art. So I would definitely go follow him just because he does a bunch of, like you said, you do a lot of things and you often post about a lot of them. And even the worlds you create with a lot of your personal art is super dope. And a bunch of cuties in there, a bunch of cool guys, little guys doing a bunch of nefarious things. My personal favorite, I like Nightlight a lot. That's one of my favorite creations you've done. I just love that world because it's very Souls coded to me, and I love the Souls games. So
Yes,
just
we
wanted
could have
to
done a whole
throw out some
podcast
appreciation.
about. We could have done a whole podcast about Souls games.
Oh yeah, for sure. Another shared interest between us. So once again, Teach, thank you for joining me. Everyone out there listening, thank you for checking out the Very Best podcast. Here's hoping you catch them all, or at the very least, work to become your very best. Bye.